In today's episode, we dive into the most disturbing animal attacks that happened while people were taking selfies. From a couple that were taking selfies with a lion cub, not knowing that its mother was watching, to a sanctuary staff member that entered an enclosure to get a selfie with a lion. It was July 27, 2017. And the Florida Everglades shimmered under the brutal summer sun like a vast green mirror. The temperature had already climbed past 90 degrees by mid-morning, and the humidity made the air feel thick enough to swim through. This was the heart of one of America's most unique and dangerous ecosystems, where sawgrass prairies stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and dark water channels wound through cypress hammocks like liquid shadows. Warren Elkins had been retired for just 6 months, and he was determined to make the most of his newfound freedom. The 67-year-old former civil engineer from Ohio had spent 40 years designing bridges and highways, but his true passion had always been photography. He'd recently joined an online wildlife photography forum where members shared tips, locations, and their most spectacular shots. The forum had been buzzing about the Everglades, with several photographers posting stunning images of alligators, birds, and other wildlife. The Everglades ecosystem is built around water, a slow-moving river of grass that flows from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay. During summer months, water levels drop significantly, concentrating wildlife around remaining pools and channels. This creates exceptional opportunities for wildlife viewing, but it also increases danger as predators become more territorial and aggressive while competing for limited resources. American alligators are perfectly adapted killing machines, capable of reaching lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 1,000 pounds. Their powerful jaws can snap shut with a force of almost 3,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a turtle shell or break human bones like twigs. They're ambush predators that can remain motionless for hours before exploding into action, capable of launching themselves completely out of the water to catch prey. Warren had driven down from his winter home in Tampa armed with a new digital camera and determination to capture the perfect alligator photograph. He'd spent hours studying online tutorials and forum posts, learning about the best locations and techniques for wildlife photography in the Everglades. His plan was simple: find a large alligator sunning itself on the bank, set up his tripod at a safe distance, and capture the kind of dramatic close-up that would earn respect from his online photography community. He'd been walking along the canal for about an hour when he spotted what appeared to be the perfect subject. A massive alligator at least 10 feet long, lying motionless on the opposite bank about 50 yards away. Warren found a section where the fence had been damaged by recent storms, creating a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. He made his way carefully toward the canal's edge, setting up his tripod about 20 feet from the water. The alligator across the canal remained motionless, and Warren began taking photos, adjusting his settings and composition. But he wasn't satisfied with the angle. He needed to get lower, closer to the water level to create the dramatic perspective he was envisioning. What Warren didn't realize was that a second alligator had been lying submerged in the canal just a few feet away from where he was setting up his equipment. The murky water provided perfect camouflage, and the alligator had been monitoring the unusual activity on the bank with growing interest. Warren was adjusting his tripod legs and preparing to take a selfie with the distant alligator in the background when a hidden predator struck. The 12-foot alligator exploded from the water with shocking speed and power, its massive jaws opening wide as it launched itself toward the crouching photographer. The alligator's jaws clamped down on Warren's right leg just above the knee, its 68 razor-sharp teeth penetrating deep into muscle and bone. The force of the bite shattered his femur and severed major arteries, causing immediate and massive blood loss. Warren screamed and fell backward, but the alligator maintained its grip and began its characteristic death roll, spinning rapidly in the water to disorient prey and tear away large chunks of flesh. The death roll dragged Warren into the canal, where the alligator's home field advantage became overwhelming. In the murky water, Warren couldn't see or breathe, and the alligator's powerful tail and body prevented any chance of escape. The predator's jaws released and repositioned several times, each bite targeting different parts of Warren's body as the attack continued. A group of tourists on the nearby boardwalk heard Warren's initial scream and saw the violent thrashing in the water. They immediately called 911 while trying to locate the source of the disturbance. By the time park rangers arrived with emergency equipment, the water had returned to its deceptively calm state. Rescue divers entered the water with extreme caution, using poles and hooks to search the murky canal bottom. Warren's body was recovered 3 hours later, approximately 50 yards downstream from where the attack had occurred. The medical examiner determined that Warren had died from massive trauma and blood loss caused by multiple alligator bites. Park officials used the incident to reinforce safety messaging and increase enforcement of restricted area boundaries. New fencing was installed along popular photography locations, and warning signs were updated with more graphic language about the dangers of approaching alligators. It was August 14, 2018, and the mist hung low over Uganda's Bwindi impenetrable forest, creating an otherworldly atmosphere among the ancient trees. The dense canopy filtered sunlight into scattered beams that illuminated the forest floor, where centuries of fallen leaves created a carpet that muffled every footstep. This was one of the last refuges of the mountain gorilla, a place where humans were visitors in a kingdom ruled by creatures of immense power and intelligence. Nolan Kerrigan had joined a guided gorilla trekking expedition as part of what he called his Authentic Africa experience. At 34, he worked as a sustainable housing consultant and had recently begun promoting ecotourism through a modest blog read primarily by environmental professionals and green architecture enthusiasts. He wasn't famous, but he took pride in positioning himself as more knowledgeable than typical tourists, often challenging guides and correcting other group members. The trek had begun before dawn, with 8 tourists following experienced guides through increasingly dense vegetation. Nolan had researched mountain gorillas extensively, reading academic papers about their behavior and social structure. He felt confident in his understanding of these creatures and frequently shared facts with the group, despite the guide's request for silence. Their destination was the territory of the Rushagura family, a group of 17 mountain gorillas led by a massive silverback named Marima. The guides had been tracking this family for years and knew their patterns intimately. As they approached the gorilla's current location, the lead guide reminded everyone of the critical rules. Maintain a 7-meter distance, avoid direct eye contact, stay low to appear non-threatening, and never make sudden movements or loud noises. Mountain gorillas are among the most powerful primates on Earth, with adult silverbacks weighing up to 400 pounds and possessing the strength of 10 men. Despite their primarily vegetarian diet, they have massive canine teeth and can become extremely aggressive when they perceive threats to their family group. Silverbacks use chest beating, charging, and physical dominance to maintain order and protect their troop. While generally peaceful, they will not hesitate to attack if their authority is challenged or their family is threatened. The group had been observing the gorilla family for 20 minutes when Marima emerged from behind a cluster of bamboo stalks. The silverback was magnificent, his silver-gray back gleaming in the filtered sunlight, his massive frame moving with surprising grace through the undergrowth. Several females and juveniles fed peacefully nearby, occasionally glancing at the human visitors with mild curiosity. The tourists crouched in respectful silence, cameras clicking softly as they documented this rare encounter. The guides monitored both the gorillas and their charges, ready to intervene if anyone violated the safety protocols. Everything was proceeding perfectly, until Nolan decided he needed a better shot. While the others remained crouched, Nolan slowly stood to his full height, raising his phone above his head to capture what he envisioned as a panoramic selfie with the silverback in the background. The guide immediately whispered for him to get down, but Nolan waved him off dismissively, believing his research had given him superior insight into gorilla behavior. To make matters worse, Nolan made a soft clicking sound with his tongue, trying to get Marima to look toward the camera. The silverback's head snapped up immediately, his dark eyes locking onto the standing human. In gorilla society, standing tall and making direct challenges are acts of aggression that demanded a response from the dominant male. Marima rose to his full height, his massive chest expanding as he began the intimidation display that precedes an attack. He beat his chest with thunderous blows that echoed through the forest, the sound reverberating off the trees like gunshots. The other gorillas scattered, mothers grabbing their young as they retreated to safety. Nolan finally realized his mistake and began to lower himself, but it was too late. The silverback had interpreted his behavior as a direct challenge to his authority, and gorilla social structure demanded a violent response. Marima charged with explosive speed, covering the distance between them in 3 powerful strides. The impact was devastating. The silverback's massive hands grabbed Nolan by the shoulders and slammed him to the ground with bone-crushing force. Nolan's collarbone snapped audibly as he hit the forest floor, but Marima wasn't finished. The gorilla's powerful jaws clamped down on Nolan's torso, his canine teeth puncturing through ribs and into vital organs. Marima lifted Nolan's broken body and shook him violently before hurling him against a tree trunk. The impact shattered Nolan's spine and skull, ending his life instantly. The silverback stood over the motionless form for several seconds, huffing and beating his chest one final time to assert his dominance. The guides immediately began their emergency protocol, using smoke canisters and noisemakers to drive the agitated gorilla away from the group. The other tourists were evacuated quickly while radio calls went out for medical assistance. By the time the helicopter medics arrived 2 hours later, there was nothing they could do. Nolan's death was ruled the result of his own actions in violating established safety protocols. The Uganda Wildlife Authority conducted a thorough investigation but found no fault with the guides or the trekking procedures. Marima and his family were monitored closely for several weeks but showed no unusual aggression towards subsequent visitor groups. New safety measures were implemented, including mandatory pre-trek briefings with video demonstrations of proper behavior around gorillas. Guides were given additional authority to remove tourists who refused to follow instructions, and group sizes were reduced to make supervision easier. Nolan's blog remained online for months after his death, his final post describing his excitement about the upcoming gorilla encounter. His family eventually took it down, unable to reconcile his confident words with the tragedy that followed. On August 12, 2019, Sarah and Michael Winscott woke early to the sound of wind moving through the pines outside their rental cabin in West Glacier, Montana. It was their 3rd day in Glacier National Park and the final full day of a trip they'd looked forward to for months. From their home in Seattle, they had planned it as an escape, an anniversary retreat away from the noise of the city and the digital pull of everyday life. Michael, 30, was a software engineer who often sought solitude in nature. Weekdays found him buried in code and system architecture, but weekends were for trails, gear checklists, and long hikes that quieted the mind. Sarah, 28, worked in publishing and had a gentler rhythm. She was reflective and observant with a strong creative streak. What she loved most about the outdoors wasn't the distance covered or elevation gained, but the stillness of it, the way time stretched and softened around trees and mountains. Together, they were grounded. Michael brought order and structure, Sarah brought openness and curiosity. It was the kind of quiet compatibility that revealed itself most clearly out on a trail. They'd spent the day before visiting some of the park's more crowded spots, places with gift shops, overlooked signs, and slow-moving families. Today, they wanted something more personal. They chose the Highline Trail not for its reputation, but for its promise of space, less foot traffic, more silence. It was one of those trails that seemed to unfold with every step, always hinting at something just beyond the bend. By 8:15 a.m., they were already on the move. The trail's early sections offered a mixture of narrow cliffside paths and stretches of shaded forest. The air was cool, still clinging to the remnants of the night. Their conversation was sparse, punctuated by moments of quiet observation. Distant hawks, the rustle of squirrels in the brush, the occasional squeal of a marmot. Occasionally, they'd pause to take in the view or snap a photo. Sarah often carried a compact camera strapped to her backpack, and while she rarely said much while shooting, the slight curve of her mouth revealed how much she enjoyed trying to preserve these passing moments. As the morning stretched on, they moved deeper into the park, away from the popular trailheads. They passed only a handful of other hikers. The sky had cleared and the forest opened up into alpine meadows lined with wildflowers. It felt as if the park belonged to them alone. Around 10:30 a.m., they emerged into a long, open slope of grass and scattered stone. It was quiet, peaceful. Then, about 50 yards ahead, something moved. At first, Sarah thought it might be a bison, but the shape was wrong. Heavier through the shoulders with a sloping back and darker fur. It was a grizzly, large, powerful, and completely absorbed in foraging. Its nose was buried in the soil, searching for roots or insects, entirely unaware of the human presence nearby. Michael reacted immediately. His posture shifted and he slowed his pace, signaling that they needed to put distance between themselves and the animal. Sarah stayed behind him, wide-eyed but calm. Neither of them had ever encountered a bear in the wild before. They knew the theory, of course. They had reviewed the safety brochures, packed bear spray, and mentally rehearsed what to do. But theory meant little when standing on the trail with a predator just up ahead. They didn't speak, but Sarah instinctively pulled out her iPhone and switched to selfie mode. She kept her voice low, barely above a whisper, as she recorded, framing herself with the bear in the blurred background. It wasn't for content or to show off, just a quiet, impulsive way to capture something that felt unreal, the kind of moment people describe but rarely have proof of. She held the phone steady, barely breathing. Then a breeze cut through the clearing. The bear lifted its head. Its posture shifted subtly, ears forward, body tense. It was no longer foraging, it was assessing. Sarah and Michael began to back away slowly and without sudden movement. The bear watched. It didn't charge, it didn't growl, but it began to follow. At first, it was a walk, one slow step, then another. The couple quickened their pace, retreating down the path without turning their backs. Their movements were deliberate, practiced exactly as they had been instructed. But the bear's behavior had changed. It wasn't browsing anymore, it was closing the gap. The air had changed. No more birdsong, no more breeze. Just footsteps on gravel and the growing awareness that they were being followed. They moved faster, and the bear followed. The trail narrowed as they moved back the way they had come, a steep drop on one side and thick underbrush on the other. Behind them, the bear continued to follow, slow at first, measured as if trying to decide whether the figures ahead were a threat or a curiosity. But each time Sarah and Michael increased their pace, so did the bear. Its walk became a trot, its head lowered, nostrils flaring, tracking scent and sound with unnerving precision. Then, with no clear signal, it broke into a full charge. The sound was overwhelming. An explosion of movement, of claws scraping against rock, of limbs crushing foliage. The space between them vanished in seconds. Sarah and Michael turned and ran, their boots thudding against the uneven ground, lungs already straining from the altitude and adrenaline. The forest blurred as they fled, but the bear was faster, much faster. Sarah stumbled first. Her foot caught on a rock embedded in the trail's edge, and she collapsed forward, her shoulder slamming against the ground. She tried to rise, but the bear was already there. It struck her from behind, a massive paw raking across her back and tearing through her jacket and into the muscle beneath. She collapsed again under the weight of the impact, arms instinctively drawn around her head. The bear's second swipe landed across her left side, spinning her onto her back. Its claws tore through her ribs and abdomen, opening deep wounds that immediately soaked her clothing in blood. Michael had turned at the sound of her fall and saw everything. Her body twisting under the force of the blow, the blur of fur and movement. He ran back toward her, unsure of what he would do, unsure if anything he did would matter. The bear was fully engaged now, towering over Sarah as it pinned her to the ground. It bit down across her upper torso, its jaws clamping through fabric and flesh, crushing ribs beneath its weight. He stopped just short of the bear's range, instinct holding him back. He reached for the bear spray, fumbled with the cap, raised his arm, but the angle was wrong, the bear was too low, and the chaos too immediate. The spray wouldn't reach, he knew it. The bear didn't even glance in his direction. Its focus remained entirely on Sarah. In a split second of clarity, he realized there was nothing he could do with his bare hands that would change the outcome. The bear was not deterred by shouts, not frightened by the presence of another person. It had decided she was a threat, or prey, or simply too close. Every survival instinct screamed at him to run, and so he did. Michael turned and sprinted. He ran down the trail, his body driven by fear, guilt, and helplessness. Every turn felt like a betrayal, every step away from Sarah like abandoning her again. As he ran, he pulled out his phone, trying to call for help, but there was no signal, just a blank screen and a flashing SOS icon. Nearly 2 miles down the trail, he passed a pair of older hikers resting at a junction. He shouted, waved, didn't slow down. At the intersection of the Highline and Loop trails, he finally reached a volunteer trail steward, an off-duty ranger stationed at a small information post. She saw his panic immediately and radioed park dispatch. All she could report was a frantic man shouting about a bear attack. Rangers trained in backcountry emergencies were dispatched from the nearest station, with others hiking in from nearby trailheads. The terrain was steep, the trails were narrow, it took over an hour for help to reach the site. When they arrived, Sarah was gone. Her body was found roughly 20 feet off the main trail, partially buried beneath a scatter of branches, soil, and crushed vegetation. The bear had cached her, an instinctual behavior, not a predatory one, but a territorial response. Her injuries were catastrophic. Multiple lacerations to the back, chest, and abdomen, crushed ribs, and deep puncture wounds along her shoulder and neck. The medical examiner later concluded that she had died within minutes of the initial strike. The bear was gone. There were no signs it had remained nearby, and no additional attacks were reported in the days that followed. The rangers marked the site, flagged off the trail section, and began a careful sweep of the area to ensure no other hikers were at risk. Michael returned with them, but only to identify her body. In the days that followed, Glacier National Park closed the Highline Trail indefinitely. Rangers posted signs, rerouted foot traffic, and began reinforcing their wildlife safety protocols. The investigation concluded quickly. The bear's behavior had been defensive, not predatory. It had been startled, followed its instincts, and responded as wild animals often do when confronted with something unfamiliar and too close. Park officials made the decision not to euthanize the animal. A year later, a small wooden marker was placed near the bend in the trail where the attack occurred. It bore no names, no dates, just a short inscription etched into its surface. Respect the wild, keep your distance. It was September 23, 2023, when India's National Zoological Park in Delhi would witness one of its most horrific lion attacks. By 2023, India's zoos had recorded over 100 serious incidents involving big cats between 2010 and 2023, though only 3 had resulted in fatalities. The Delhi Zoo, however, despite hosting over 3 million visitors annually, had maintained a perfect safety record since its establishment. The nation's capital had seen a surge in zoo visitors that year, with attendance up 25% from 2022. Tourism officials attributed this increase to post-pandemic recovery and improved facilities. Yet this surge brought new challenges: overcrowding during peak hours, increased pressure on security staff, and growing concerns about visitor behavior around dangerous animals. The Delhi Zoo, sprawling across 176 acres in the heart of India's capital, represented India's premier wildlife facility. Established in 1959 during Jawaharlal Nehru's administration, it housed over 1,350 animals across 130 species. The lion enclosure, constructed in 1989 and renovated in 2019, featured a sophisticated design: an 18-foot deep moat surrounding a 21,528 square foot naturalistic habitat, complete with artificial rocks, shade structures, and cooling systems. The facility's security systems reflected modern zoo standards. 15 armed guards patrolled the grounds in rotating shifts, while 128 CCTV cameras monitored key areas. The lion enclosure itself featured multiple safety elements: 3-tier barriers, emergency response stations every 164 feet, and a sophisticated public announcement system. Daily inspections ensured all safety features remained functional, with maintenance logs meticulously maintained as per international protocols. While the Delhi Zoo took every measure to ensure the safety of its visitors, the story of Maqsood Singh highlighted a different kind of vulnerability, one that went unnoticed by the very systems designed to protect. Living with his parents and younger sister in a one-room apartment in East Delhi's Anand Parbat industrial area, Maqsood earned a modest salary of 12,000 rupees, around $144 monthly, at Sharma Garments Factory. His father, disabled from a factory accident years earlier, relied on Maqsood's income. The family's financial struggles made it impossible to address Maqsood's increasingly erratic behavior. Mental health care for many in India's working class remained an unaffordable luxury. The signs of his deteriorating mental state had been visible for months. Co-workers at Sharma Garments noticed his increasing isolation during lunch breaks. His supervisor, Rohan Mehra, had documented several unexplained absences in the past month alone. At home, Maqsood spent hours staring at wildlife documentaries on their small television, particularly fascinated by big cats. His mother later recalled his strange questions about animals' souls and their capacity for mercy. That Tuesday morning began like any other. Maqsood left home at 7 a.m. telling his mother he was heading to work, but he never arrived. Security cameras later captured him wandering the streets for hours, stopping occasionally to watch stray dogs and feed pigeons. At 12:15 p.m., he made an unexpected decision: purchasing a zoo ticket. The 50 rupee entry fee may have seemed insignificant to most, but for Maqsood it was nearly half of his daily wages. Inside the zoo, Sher, an 8-year-old male African lion, embodied nature's perfect predator. Born in South Africa's Pretoria Zoo, he had arrived in Delhi in 2018 as part of an international breeding program. Weighing 400 pounds, his powerful frame was a testament to millennia of evolution, a creature built for the hunt. Under the care of trained staff, his daily routine consisted of regulated feedings, enrichment activities, and constant monitoring. Lions are apex predators whose hunting abilities have been refined over millions of years. Their bite force exceeds 1,000 psi, enough to crush a buffalo's skull. Their paws can deliver 400 pounds of force in a single swipe, while their claws, reaching lengths of 4 inches, can disembowel prey with surgical precision. Their night vision is 6 times better than humans, and their roar can be heard up to 5 miles away. Most importantly, despite years in captivity, they retain every predatory instinct of their wild ancestors. Sher's keepers had noted his particular intelligence. He could recognize individual staff members, understood feeding routines, and displayed all the natural behaviors of wild lions. This included territorial patrolling, scent marking, and most critically, the instinct to eliminate any perceived threats to his domain. At precisely 1:05 p.m., while visitors crowded the viewing area, Maqsood began his fatal journey. Security footage captured him methodically removing his shoes and placing them neatly by the first barrier. The enclosure's triple security system had been designed based on international standards: a 3-foot outer fence, a 4-foot warning barrier with anti-climb spikes, and finally the 18-foot moat. Each barrier bore warning signs in 3 languages, with pictorial warnings for illiterate visitors. The viewing area was particularly crowded that afternoon. A school group from South Delhi had just arrived, their blue uniforms dotting the observation deck. Tourist buses had deposited their usual Tuesday crowds, and local families sought refuge from Delhi's bustling streets. Security cameras captured over 200 visitors in the lion enclosure area at the time. What happened next would raise serious questions about mental health awareness in India's working class. Maqsood scaled the first two barriers with unsettling calmness, ignoring shouts from nearby visitors and the frantic whistles of security guards. Two schoolteachers quickly evacuated their students while other visitors began filming on their phones, a tragic reflection of modern society's response to unfolding disasters. The descent into the moat took exactly 27 seconds according to security footage. Several visitors later reported that Maqsood appeared to be mumbling to himself, his movements deliberate and almost ritualistic. Head security guard Prakash Verma, stationed about 300 feet away, immediately activated the emergency protocol, but the distance proved too great to intervene in time. Maqsood, still fixated on the lion, pulled out his phone. His behavior had become erratic in the days leading up to this moment, and this was the culmination of his growing instability. With little regard for the danger, he stepped closer to the lion's enclosure, deciding to snap a selfie with the wild predator. Ignoring the signs of the lion's territorial behavior and the increasing shouts from visitors to stay away, Maqsood's thoughts seemed consumed with the idea of capturing the moment on his phone. The attack unfolded with terrifying efficiency. Cher, who had been resting near his artificial waterfall, noticed the intrusion immediately. His transformation from relaxed zoo resident to apex predator was instant. Ears flattened, muscles tensed, tail dropped into hunting position. The lion's behavior followed textbook predatory patterns, exactly as his wild counterparts would react to an intruder. The crowd's reaction created chaos. Hundreds of visitors began screaming and throwing whatever they could find. Water bottles, food items, even shoes, trying desperately to distract the lion. Zoo staff, led by head keeper Arvind Rathore, rushed to the scene with fire extinguishers and emergency flares, but they were helplessly far from where the events were unfolding. Cher covered the 98-foot distance in less than 3 seconds, his muscular body launching forward with explosive power. The initial impact knocked Maqsood backward, the lion's 400-pound frame hitting him with the force of a small car. What followed was a display of nature's unrestrained fury that would haunt witnesses for years. The lion's first bite, targeting Maqsood's neck, a natural lion hunting instinct, delivered over 1,000 psi of crushing force. The massive paws, each equipped with retractable claws designed for gripping prey, pinned Maqsood to the ground. Emergency response teams, arriving just 10 minutes after Maqsood began his climb into the enclosure at 1:15 p.m., could only watch as the lion dragged his victim toward the concrete den, following an instinct perfected over millions of years of evolution. The recovery operation finally began at 2:30 p.m. after obtaining necessary permissions from wildlife authorities. Dr. Sunil Verma, the zoo's chief veterinarian, led a team of 6 specialists in the delicate task of sedating Cher. The process required extreme precision. Too little sedative would leave the lion dangerous. Too much could prove fatal to the valuable breeding animal. The operation itself took about 90 minutes. 2 darts containing ketamine and xylazine, carefully measured for Cher's body weight, were required before the lion was sufficiently sedated. Once the sedatives took effect, the team waited an additional 15 minutes to ensure Cher was deeply unconscious and stable, following big cat handling protocols before entering the enclosure. The investigation revealed that Maqsood died almost instantly from the first bite, with crushed cervical vertebrae, trauma from the impact, and deep claw wounds. In response to the attack, the zoo implemented stricter security measures, including taller barriers and additional CCTV cameras, and updating training for staff on handling psychiatric emergencies. Cher, the lion, remained at the zoo, but his enclosure was modified. While the debate over keeping big cats in captivity continued, experts emphasized the importance of well-managed zoos for conservation and education. The incident reinforced the truth that no matter how familiar, a wild animal's instincts can never be fully tamed. It was March 12, 2015, and Texas Hill County stretched endlessly under a brilliant blue sky. The drive-through safari park sat on 200 acres of rolling grassland about an hour west of San Antonio, where visitors could experience African wildlife without leaving the Lone Star State. The facility marketed itself as an authentic safari experience, with lions, zebras, giraffes, and other exotic animals roaming in large enclosures that visitors could drive through in their own vehicles. Lacey Darnell and her boyfriend Marcus had been road tripping across Texas for a week, hitting every quirky attraction and Instagram-worthy location they could find. The 26-year-old social media manager from Austin lived for these spontaneous adventures, and her followers had come to expect a constant stream of exciting content from her travels. She and Marcus were known for their willingness to take risks for the perfect shot. They'd bungee jumped in New Zealand, swam with sharks in Mexico, and climbed abandoned buildings for rooftop photos. The drive-through safari concept relies on the principle that most large predators view vehicles as single, non-threatening entities rather than containers full of potential prey. Years of conditioning have taught captive lions to ignore cars and trucks, treating them as part of the landscape rather than sources of food. However, this conditioning breaks down immediately when humans exit vehicles or extend body parts outside the protective metal barrier. African lions are apex predators with incredible strength and lightning-fast reflexes. Adult males can weigh up to 420 pounds and reach lengths of 10 feet from nose to tail. Their powerful jaws contain teeth designed for gripping and tearing flesh, with canines that can grow up to 3 inches long. Lions are capable of leaping horizontally up to 36 feet and can accelerate from 0 to 35 miles per hour in just a few strides. The couple have been driving through the park for about 30 minutes, following a winding dirt road that took them past various animal enclosures. As they entered the lion area, Marcus slowed their rental car to a crawl, allowing Lacey to take photos through the passenger window. A large male lion with a magnificent dark mane was walking parallel to the road, about 20 feet from their vehicle. Lacey had been taking pictures through the closed window, but the glass was creating glare and reflections that ruined her shots. She'd seen other visitors with their windows cracked open and assumed it was acceptable as long as they didn't get too close to the animals. Marcus brought the car to a complete stop as the male lion approached their section of road. Lacey rolled down her passenger window about halfway and began taking photos, initially keeping her camera and hands inside the vehicle. But the shots weren't quite right. She needed a better angle to capture both herself and the lion in the same frame. She extended her phone outside the window, holding it at arm's length while leaning partially out of the car. The male lion's demeanor changed instantly when Lacey's upper body emerged from the vehicle. His casual walk became a focused stalk, his amber eyes locking on to the human shape that had suddenly appeared in his territory. Every muscle in his powerful frame tensed as predatory instincts that had been dormant for years suddenly roared back to life. The lion launched himself at the car window with explosive power, his front paws hitting the door frame as his jaws targeted Lacey's exposed torso. His massive weight and momentum drove her backward into the car, but his claws found purchase on her shoulders and arms, preventing her from escaping back inside the vehicle. His jaws clamped down on her neck and upper chest, his 4-inch canine teeth penetrating deep into vital organs and major blood vessels. Marcus grabbed Lacey's legs and tried desperately to pull her back into the car, but the lion's grip was unbreakable. The predator's powerful neck muscles allowed him to maintain his hold while using his body weight to drag his prey toward the window opening. Blood began flowing immediately as the lion's teeth found arteries and his claws raked across Lacey's back and shoulders. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds, but the damage was catastrophic. The lion's bite had crushed Lacey's windpipe and severed her carotid artery, causing massive blood loss and preventing her from breathing. Her struggles weakened rapidly as shock and oxygen deprivation took their toll, and within moments she went limp in the predator's jaws. Park staff responded immediately when they heard Marcus's screams for help. 2 rangers arrived in an emergency vehicle equipped with air horns, flares, and other deterrent devices. The loud noises and sudden activity caused the lion to release his grip and back away from the car. Emergency medical personnel were called immediately, but Lacey was already beyond help. The lion's attack had caused injuries that were incompatible with life, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The incident prompted an immediate investigation by state wildlife authorities and resulted in significant changes to the park's safety protocols. It was October 15, 2016, and the golden aspens of Flathead National Forest stretched endlessly across the Montana landscape. The air was crisp with early winter's promise, and the silence was broken only by the occasional crack of a branch or distant bird call. This was wilderness in its purest form, vast, untamed, and unforgiving to those who underestimated its power. Knox Merritt had driven up from Missoula that morning, his truck loaded with camera gear and his latest acquisition, a high-end drone equipped with Follow Me technology. At 25, he was a mechanical engineering graduate student who had built a modest YouTube following documenting outdoor gear tests. His 8,000 subscribers knew him as methodical and thorough, someone who pushed equipment to its limits in remote locations. Friends described him as brilliant but stubborn, the type who reads manuals cover to cover, but dismissed park safety guidelines as suggestions for tourists. Knox had chosen this particular trail for its isolation and dramatic vistas. He wanted to test his drone's new wide-angle lens and Follow Me mode, which would track his movements automatically while filming. The technology fascinated him, the precision, the engineering behind it. He had studied the weather patterns, charged his batteries, and planned his route with characteristic attention to detail. What he hadn't planned for was sharing the forest with its most dangerous resident. Grizzly bears are among North America's most formidable predators, with adult females weighing up to 400 pounds and males reaching 800 pounds or more. They can run 35 miles per hour and have a bite force exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch. Mother bears with cubs are particularly aggressive, viewing any perceived threat as reason to attack without warning. Their sense of smell is 7 times stronger than a bloodhound's, and they can detect scents from miles away. In autumn, they become increasingly territorial as they prepare for winter hibernation. Knox had been hiking for 2 hours when he spotted a massive grizzly sow with 2 cubs foraging near a berry patch about 200 meters away. His pulse quickened, not with fear but with excitement. This was exactly the kind of footage that would set his channel apart. He pulled out his drone controller and activated Follow Me mode, positioning himself for what he envisioned as an incredible shot, him in the foreground with the bear family in the background. The drone lifted off with a quiet whir, its camera automatically tracking Knox as he began walking backward toward a small clearing. His eyes were fixed on the controller screen, watching the composition come together perfectly. The bears looked peaceful, almost posed against the autumn landscape. He adjusted his position, moving closer to get the framing just right. What Knox didn't realize was that the wind had shifted, carrying his scent directly toward the sow. Her head snapped up immediately, nostrils flaring as she identified the human smell. She rose on her hind legs, scanning the area until she spotted him. Knox was still focused on his screen, completely unaware that 400 pounds of protective fury had locked onto him as a threat. The sow dropped to all fours and began moving toward him, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Her cubs scrambled up a nearby tree as she had taught them. By the time Knox looked up from his controller, she had already covered half the distance between them. He froze, the controller slipping from his hands as the massive bear charged across the remaining 50 feet in seconds. She hit him with the force of a small car, her claws raking across his chest as the impact drove him backward into the brush. Knox's shoulders separated with an audible pop as he hit the ground, but the sow wasn't finished. She grabbed him by the torso, her jaws crushing ribs as she shook him like a rag doll. Knox's spine snapped under the pressure. Blood poured from multiple puncture wounds as the bear's teeth found vital organs. She dragged him several feet through the undergrowth before releasing him and stepping back, huffing heavily. Knox lay motionless, his body broken beyond repair. The drone continued circling overhead, its camera recording the aftermath until the battery finally died. The sow watched for several minutes before returning to her cubs, who climbed down from their tree refuge. Knox's body wasn't discovered until 3 days later, when park rangers followed the drone's GPS signal after his roommate reported him missing. The investigation revealed that he had violated multiple wilderness safety protocols by approaching too close to a bear with cubs. The sow and her offspring were monitored but not relocated, as officials determined she had acted defensively. Knox's YouTube channel was quietly taken down by his family. His final video, uploaded automatically from his phone's scheduled posts, was a gear review of the very drone that had captured his death. It was September 3rd, 2018, and the Great Smoky Mountains were dressed in the early colors of autumn. The ancient peaks rolled endlessly toward the horizon, covered in a tapestry of green, just beginning to show hints of gold and red. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and distant sounds of rushing water from hidden streams. It was peak hiking season, with thousands of visitors drawn to the park's trails and abundant wildlife viewing opportunities. Jared Crossley had been planning this hiking trip for months, eager to show his girlfriend Amanda the rugged outdoor lifestyle he'd been cultivating since moving to Nashville. The 31-year-old gym instructor had grown up in suburban Atlanta, but he reinvented himself as an outdoorsman after relocating to Tennessee. His social media was filled with hiking photos, camping gear reviews, and motivational posts about conquering nature's challenges. He'd convinced Amanda, a cautious accountant who preferred indoor activities, to join him for a weekend in the Smokies. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is home to approximately 1,500 black bears, making it one of the most densely populated bear habitats in North America. September is a critical time for bears as they enter hyperphagia, a period of intense feeding before winter hibernation. During this time, bears can consume up to 20,000 calories per day and become more aggressive in defending food sources and territory. Black bears are deceptively powerful animals, capable of reaching speeds of 30 miles per hour and climbing trees with remarkable agility. Adult females typically weigh between 200 and 300 pounds, while males can exceed 600 pounds. Their claws are up to 4 inches long and designed for digging and climbing, but they are equally effective as weapons. Mother bears with cubs are considered among the most dangerous animals in North America due to their fierce protective instincts. The couple had been hiking for about 2 hours when Jared decided they needed to find a more scenic location for photos. Against Amanda's protests, he led them off the designated path and into a dense section of the forest where few hikers ventured. They'd been bushwhacking through thick undergrowth for about 20 minutes when they emerged into a small clearing surrounded by berry bushes and fallen logs. About 30 yards away, a small black bear cub was foraging among the berry bushes, its glossy coat shining in the dappled sunlight. The cub appeared to be alone, focused entirely on its feeding, and seemed oblivious to the human presence nearby. Jared immediately pulled out his phone and began moving closer to the cub, ignoring Amanda's urgent whispers to stay back. What Jared didn't realize was that mother bears often leave their cubs in safe locations while they forage nearby. The mother bear had been feeding in dense brush less than 50 yards away, well within the protective range she maintained around her offspring. When she heard unfamiliar sounds and caught the scent of humans approaching her cub, her maternal instincts triggered an immediate and violent response. Jacob had crouched down about 10 feet from the cub, holding his phone at arm's length to capture both himself and the young bear in the frame. The cub looked up from its feeding, tilted its head curiously at the strange human, and took a few steps closer. The mother bear exploded from the undergrowth without warning, her 250-pound frame moving with shocking speed and agility. She covered the 30 yards between her hiding spot and the perceived threat in less than 3 seconds, her powerful legs propelling her forward in a blur of black fur and muscle. Her roar shattered the peaceful silence of the forest as she launched herself at the human who dared to threaten her cub. Jared was still crouched with his phone extended when the mother bear hit him from behind. The impact knocked him face first into the forest floor, his phone flying into the underbrush as 250 pounds of enraged bear landed on his back. Her claws raked across his shoulders and neck, tearing through his hiking shirt and deep into muscle tissue. The bear's jaws clamped down on the back of Jared's neck, her powerful bite crushing vertebrae and severing his spinal cord. Her canine teeth penetrated deep into his neck and skull. Jared's body went limp as his nervous system was severed. But the bear continued her attack, driven by the primal need to eliminate any threat to her offspring. Amanda screamed and ran, crashing through the underbrush as she fled toward the main trail. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the continuing attack. The bear's huffing and growling mixed with the horrible sounds of claws and teeth tearing through flesh and bone. Park rangers responded within 20 minutes, but they had to wait for additional backup and tranquilizer equipment before approaching the scene. When they finally reached the clearing, they found Jared's body severely mauled, with the mother bear and her cub nowhere to be seen. Emergency medical personnel confirmed that Jared had died from massive trauma to his neck and spinal cord. Park officials launched an investigation to locate the mother bear using tracking dogs and helicopter surveillance. After careful evaluation by wildlife biologists, officials determined that the bear had acted defensively to protect their offspring and posed no ongoing threat to park visitors. The decision was made not to euthanize the animal. It was March 22, 2015, and the humid air of Chiang Mai province hung heavy with the scent of jasmine and diesel fumes. In the hills outside the city, a facility calling itself an ethical tiger sanctuary drew tourists with promises of close encounters and conservation education. The bamboo structures and lush vegetation created an illusion of natural habitat, but beneath the surface, corners were being cut in ways that would prove deadly. Isla Monroe and Sawyer Beck had arrived in Thailand 5 days earlier for their honeymoon. Isla, 27, taught middle school art and had an adventurous spirit that constantly sought out experiences beyond the typical tourist trail. Sawyer, 29, worked in IT and maintained a modest travel blog read mostly by friends and co-workers. They weren't influencers, just a couple who enjoyed documenting their adventures and sharing them with their small online community. The sanctuary had been Isla's choice, selected after hours of research into what she believed were ethical wildlife encounters. The facility's website emphasized conservation and education, with photos of visitors safely interacting with tiger cubs under professional supervision. What the marketing materials didn't mention were the facility's financial struggles and the resulting shortcuts in safety protocols. The guide that day was Somchai, a young man with limited experience who had been hired just weeks earlier. The facility was understaffed and operating on a shoestring budget, relying heavily on inexperienced workers who received minimal training. Somchai had been told the basics: keep tourists away from adult tigers, supervise cub interactions, and always secure the transport gates. But in the chaos of managing multiple tour groups, critical details were often overlooked. Tigers are apex predators capable of killing prey much larger than humans. An adult tiger can weigh up to 660 pounds and possesses a bite force of 1,000 pounds per square inch. They're ambush hunters, capable of explosive bursts of speed reaching 35 miles per hour. Even in captivity, their predatory instincts remain intact, and they can attack without warning when startled or threatened. The couple was led to a semi-open enclosure where several tiger cubs played under the afternoon sun. The area was separated from the adult tiger section by a series of gates and barriers, designed to allow staff to move animals safely between enclosures. Isla and Sawyer settled onto a wooden bench as Some Chai brought over a 6-month-old cub for supervised interaction. Isla was delighted, gently stroking the cub's fur while Sawyer prepared his camera for what they planned as their signature honeymoon photo. The cub was docile and well socialized, purring softly as Isla scratched behind its ears. Everything seemed perfect as Sawyer positioned himself beside his wife, extending his arm to frame the shot. What none of them noticed was that Sawyer had inadvertently leaned against one of the transport gates. The latch, which should have been secured with a padlock, had been left unlocked by a staff member who assumed the area had been cleared after the morning feeding. The gate was designed to swing inward under pressure, and Sawyer's weight was gradually pushing it open. Behind the gate, a 400-pound adult male tiger named Raja paced restlessly. He had been moved to the transport area earlier that morning and forgotten in the confusion of managing tour groups. The scent of humans and the presence of the cub had made him increasingly agitated. The gate creaked open just wide enough for Raja to squeeze through. Isla and Sawyer were completely focused on their photo, with Some Chai distracted by another tourist question. The adult tiger emerged silently, his massive frame moving with predatory grace as he assessed the situation. Raja struck without warning, lunging at Isla with explosive force. His claws raked across her back as his weight drove her to the ground. She screamed as his jaws clamped down on her shoulder, crushing bone and tearing through muscle. Sawyer spun around and instinctively threw himself at the tiger, trying to pull his wife free. The tiger released Isla and turned on Sawyer, swatting him aside with a paw that sent him crashing into the wooden fence. Raja's claws opened 4 deep gashes across Sawyer's chest before his teeth found the young man's throat. The bite was swift and devastating, crushing his windpipe and severing major arteries. Some Chai screamed for help as other staff members came running. The facility's emergency protocol called for tranquilizer guns, but in the panic, no one could locate the equipment quickly enough. By the time senior staff arrived with noisemakers and barriers to drive Raja back, both Isla and Sawyer lay motionless in pools of blood. Isla had died from massive blood loss caused by the tiger's claws puncturing her lung and severing arteries in her shoulder. Sawyer's injuries were even more severe. His throat had been crushed, and he had lost consciousness within seconds of the attack. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. The authorities launched an investigation that revealed numerous safety violations at the facility. The sanctuary was immediately shut down, and criminal charges were filed against the owners for negligent homicide. The case was quietly settled out of court, with the families receiving undisclosed compensation. The tiger cubs were relocated to a legitimate conservation facility, while Raja and the other adult tigers were transferred to a government-run sanctuary with proper security measures. The facility's property was eventually sold and converted to a hotel. Isla and Sawyer's travel blog remained online for months after their deaths, their final post describing their excitement about visiting the tiger sanctuary. Friends eventually took it down, unable to bear the contrast between their hopeful words and the tragedy that followed. On June 17, 2014, the morning sun rose over the Sao Paulo Wildlife Park in Brazil, casting golden streaks across dew-slick walkways and rustling palm fronds. The park was quiet, hours from the buzz of tourists. Inside, birds rustled in their enclosures, and somewhere near the back, a lion's low rumble echoed off stone. It was a day like any other, or so it appeared. Marco Oliveira, a 32-year-old senior zookeeper, arrived earlier than usual. He had done this many times before, always quiet, always punctual. His co-workers knew him as soft-spoken, often keeping to himself during breaks, sometimes skipping group lunches altogether. He wasn't antisocial, just content in silence. The zoo for Marco was more than a job, it was his world. He lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment less than a mile from the park entrance. He had no close family in Sao Paulo. His parents had retired to a rural town in the south, and his older brother had moved abroad years ago. Marco rarely talked about them, he rarely traveled, rarely took time off, and never strayed far from his routine. On weekends, even when he wasn't scheduled to work, he would walk the zoo's outer paths, jotting down notes on animal behavior or photographing enclosure designs he admired. Among the animals, Marco was known, trusted, especially in the carnivore section where he'd worked for years. He spoke to them like old friends, even the more temperamental ones seemed calmer around him. That connection wasn't just professional, for Marco it was deeply personal. A few months before the incident, Marco had been assigned an additional role by park management, overseeing the zoo's social media accounts. It wasn't part of his original job, but with his eye for photography and quiet dedication to the animals, he seemed like a natural fit. Management wanted more visibility, and Marco began posting updates, feeding sessions, close-ups of the animals, morning routines. At first, it was just part of his routine, but gradually the boundaries between care and content began to blur. Before he was asked to manage the zoo's social media, his own accounts were filled with soft-focus animal portraits, rarely selfies. His captions read more like diary entries, quiet observations about the way a jaguar breathed during a nap or how sunlight caught the shimmer of a lizard's scales. To those who worked with him, Marco was dependable to a fault. He never missed a shift, never raised his voice, he wasn't ambitious in the conventional sense, never chasing promotions. But he took pride in consistency. Quiet, steady, unseen by most, but absolutely present. Despite his quiet nature, Marco had embraced the new role the park had offered, managing its social media. He never asked for it, but when the position was offered, he took it seriously. It gave him purpose beyond just feeding schedules and cleaning enclosures. He began taking photos, first of the animals, then of himself with the animals. Always at a distance behind fences or glass, sometimes with a colleague nearby to frame the shot. These posts gradually boosted the zoo's online following. Management noticed, so did Marco. Over time, the post became more polished. He learned lighting tricks, angles, hashtags. At 8:43 a.m. that day, 15 minutes before opening, Marco was seen on the facility's high-definition security cameras entering the large predator wing, specifically near the African lion enclosure. He had his feeding gear with him, meat bucket, gloves, boots, but unusually he also held his personal phone. The cameras captured every step. There was no scheduled feeding at that hour, and the senior carnivore keeper who normally oversaw lion protocols was off duty. Marco moved with purpose. CCTV showed him unlocking the secondary gate with 2 codes, his own and a second code he had obtained days earlier by claiming he needed to cover a sick colleague's shift. With no one else present, he bypassed the 2-person safety protocol. He paused at the gateway, glanced back once at the empty corridor, then entered the enclosure's prep chamber. Inside, he partially raised one of the overhead blinds to let in more light. The camera caught him checking the screen of his phone, adjusting it in his hand. He stepped through the final door into the lion enclosure. The enclosure mimicked the Tanzanian savanna, with scattered rocks, a small pond, and a shaded sleeping platform. At the far end, Caesar, the park's star attraction, rested under a tree. The 450-pound male lion was still, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Marco set down the feeding gear like usual, perhaps to make the scene look routine if anyone questioned it later. Then he took a few steps forward, phone in hand, turned his back to Caesar, and began raising the camera. His intent was clear: frame the perfect shot with the lion in the background. Maybe a short video, maybe just a still. Something striking to boost the zoo's morning engagement. At this point, no one else was nearby. The corridor camera showed no other staff in the area. Marco was alone. Caesar's head lifted, his eyes fixed on the shape intruding on his territory. At 8:46 a.m., the lion moved. It began with a low growl, barely audible on the CCTV audio feed. Caesar rose from his spot, muscles rippling beneath his golden coat, and took a single step forward. The motion caught Marco's attention. He turned slightly too late, the phone still raised. The lion didn't hesitate. He charged. 15 feet of distance vanished in under 2 seconds. Marco flinched, stumbling backward as the camera feed blurred. The impact knocked him flat on his back, his phone spinning away into the dirt. A second camera mounted from a different angle captured the precise moment Caesar leapt, claws extended, jaws wide. Marco screamed. The first swipe raked across his left shoulder and neck, tearing through fabric and skin. He rolled instinctively, trying to protect his face, but Caesar was on him before he could regain his footing. The lion's massive front paw landed on Marco's ribcage, pinning him down with crushing force. A second later, Caesar sank his teeth into Marco's side, just below the ribcage. Blood pooled instantly. In the corridor, a junior keeper, returning early from a coffee run, heard the distant sounds and turned toward the enclosure hallway. At first, it was just a noise, a thud, then a muffled cry. But the next sound, a frantic, guttural scream, made her drop her cup and run. Inside the enclosure, Marco was struggling, kicking weakly, trying to crawl backward as Caesar dragged him by the leg. The lion clamped down again, this time on Marco's lower back, shaking violently. His screams grew shorter, raspier. One final twist from the lion's neck, then silence. The junior keeper reached the control panel, slammed the emergency alarm, and triggered the lockdown. Within seconds, sirens echoed through the predator ring. 2 more staff members arrived, fumbling with the emergency tranquilizer kit, but it was no use. By the time they accessed the secondary gate, Marco's body was still, and Caesar was circling, agitated by the noise, blood staining its jaw. Staff used a loud sound deterrent to force Caesar into the holding pen before entering the enclosure. They pulled Marco out under armed watch, but it was already too late. His body bore deep lacerations across the chest, stomach, and back. His skull had been fractured, his ribs crushed under the weight of Caesar's strike. He was pronounced dead before emergency services even arrived. The Sao Paulo Wildlife Park remained closed for 3 days. Behind the scenes, staff were devastated. Marco had been one of them, quiet, reliable, deeply committed. Grief mixed with confusion as news spread that he had bypassed safety systems he once helped train new staff to follow. The footage left no room for speculation. He had acted alone, deliberately, and fatally outside protocol. In the days that followed, the zoo implemented emergency changes. Biometric scanners replaced code-based access for all predator enclosures, and marketing responsibilities were permanently separated from animal care roles. The lion, Caesar, was not euthanized. Authorities ruled that the animal had reacted as any apex predator would when confronted by a human inside its territory. It was July 15, 2014, when a private exotic animal collection outside Houston, Texas, would become the scene of one of America's most horrific tiger attacks. For Jessica Martinez and her best friend Amy Chen, both 23, what started as an exciting weekend adventure would end in unimaginable tragedy. Private exotic animal collections had exploded across Texas in the early 2000s. By 2014, the state housed more tigers in private hands than existed in the wild in India. Over 3,000 big cats living in backyards, private compounds, and self-proclaimed sanctuaries. Loose regulations and wealthy enthusiasts had created a dangerous combination that wildlife experts had been warning about for years. Jessica and Amy had been inseparable since their high school days in Houston's suburbs. Now, both working as dental assistants at the same practice, they spent most of their weekends together seeking out new adventures. Jessica's iPhone 5S was filled with their weekend memories, hiking trips, beach days, and local festivals. The opportunity to visit Thompson's Wild Wonders, an exotic animal sanctuary, came through Amy's cousin Mike, who worked as a caretaker at the facility. David Thompson's collection sprawled across 15 acres of his vast ranch about an hour outside Houston. The successful oil executive had started collecting exotic animals in 2008, riding the wave of private zoos that had swept across America. His compound housed 7 tigers, 4 lions, and various other dangerous predators, all kept in enclosures that barely met minimum state requirements. Amy's cousin, Mike Wilson, at age 35, represented the typical private zoo employee. Despite having no formal zoological training, he had been handling Thompson's big cats for 3 years. Like many private facility workers, his experience came solely from on-the-job learning. Thompson paid well and provided housing on the property, making it an attractive job despite the risks. The girls arrived at 4:30 p.m., just as the Texas summer heat was beginning to fade. The facility's entrance was surprisingly basic, a chain-link gate with a faded warning sign. The compound's crown jewel was Raja, an 8-year-old male Bengal tiger that Thompson had purchased as a cub from an animal dealer in Oklahoma, who had been selling off exotic animals due to financial difficulties. Raja's appearance from his concrete den drew gasps from both girls. At over 500 pounds, he was an impressive sight. Tigers are nature's perfect killing machines. Their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a buffalo's spine. Their paws pack the power to shatter skulls, while their retractable claws can grow up to 4 inches long. Most importantly, despite being born in captivity, they retain all their wild hunting instincts. The evening feeding routine began at 5:15 p.m. Raja's enclosure, a 40 by 60 foot chain-link structure, featured a narrow feeding chute along one side. The fence stood 12 feet high, topped with inward-facing wire that supposedly prevented climbing. Like many private facilities, Thompson's compound used these basic feeding systems rather than the sophisticated safety features found in accredited zoos. Mike retrieved a bucket of raw chicken from a nearby freezer, beginning the familiar feeding routine he'd performed hundreds of times before. Both girls positioned themselves at the designated viewing area approximately 5 feet from the fence. Raja's impressive displays of catching meat in midair had both girls reaching for their phones to capture the moment. The attack came without warning. Mike, focused on feeding the animals, didn't notice Jessica moving closer to the fence. She was trying to get the perfect selfie with her iPhone 5S, unconsciously edging closer for a better angle. Amy, distracted by the roar of another tiger, turned momentarily to look away from the enclosure. Mike had seen tourists take similar risks before, assuming they knew the rules. Stay behind the fence, don't get too close. When Raja's attention shifted from the food to Jessica, Mike didn't immediately react. He thought it was just a brief moment. Tigers often fixate on movement. But then he saw Jessica step within 3 feet of the enclosure. That distance triggered the tiger's predatory instincts. Raja lunged. The force of Raja's launch against the fence was explosive. The chain link, weakened by years of Texas weather, gave way at a connection point. The tiger's massive paw shot through the gap, 4-inch claws catching Jessica's shoulder and pulling her towards him. The fence continued to fail as Raja forced his head and shoulders through the widening hole. The attack lasted mere seconds, but was devastatingly effective. At around 5:20 p.m., just 5 minutes into the feeding session, Raja's powerful jaws clamped onto Jessica's upper body with immense force, crushing her shoulder and collarbone instantly. His claws tore through flesh and muscle as he attempted to pull her closer. Mike shouted, trying to intervene, but the tiger's grip was unyielding. He hurled more meat at Raja, hoping to distract him, but it was futile. Raja's focus was entirely on his prey, his instincts in full predator mode. The raw power of the attack left Jessica no chance to escape. Amy screamed and tried to grab Jessica, but her efforts were useless against the tiger's overwhelming strength. Fumbling for her phone with trembling hands, Amy dialed 911 at 5:24 p.m. The phone call reached emergency services, but the compound's remote location meant that help was at least 20 minutes away. In the chaos, Mike tried to keep the tiger at bay, but Jessica's body was already being dragged closer to the fence. By the time first responders arrived at 5:44 p.m., Jessica had been unconscious for several minutes, the massive blood loss and trauma proving fatal. The investigation revealed multiple failures. The fence's maintenance records were non-existent. The feeding chute design violated several safety recommendations. The viewing distance guidelines were completely inadequate. Thompson's insurance had lapsed 3 months earlier, and required safety inspections hadn't been performed in over a year. Raja was euthanized despite protests from animal rights groups. The incident sparked fierce debate about private exotic animal ownership in Texas. Thompson's facility was shut down, and his remaining animals were relocated to accredited sanctuaries. Amy Chen became an advocate for stricter exotic animal regulations, even testifying before the Texas legislature. Mike Wilson left the exotic animal industry entirely. The casual atmosphere at private facilities had created a false sense of security, leading to a tragedy that forever changed how Texas regulated its private exotic animal industry. It was May 19, 2016, and the Northern California hills were bathed in golden afternoon light. The private Wildlife Rehabilitation Center sat nestled among towering redwoods and rolling grasslands, about 40 miles north of San Francisco. The facility specialized in caring for injured and orphaned native wildlife, with spacious enclosures designed to give recovering animals a taste of their natural habitat while maintaining safety. Grace Redmond had been working at the center for 3 months, and every day felt like a dream come true. The 24-year-old environmental science graduate from UC Davis had always been passionate about wildlife conservation, but her true love was felines. She applied to the rehabilitation center specifically because they occasionally cared for mountain lions, and she'd spent countless hours observing their current resident, a 2-year-old male named Ranger, who'd been brought in after a car accident left him with a damaged hind leg. The rehabilitation center was built with safety as the top priority. Each enclosure featured double barrier systems with primary fencing reinforced by secondary barriers that kept visitors and staff at safe distances. The mountain lion enclosure was particularly secure, with 12-foot-high chain-link fencing topped with razor wire and a concrete moat surrounding the perimeter. Mountain lions are North America's second largest wild cat, capable of reaching weights of up to 220 pounds and lengths of 8 feet from nose to tail. They're solitary territorial predators with incredible strength and agility, able to leap vertically up to 15 feet and horizontally over 40 feet. Their powerful jaws can deliver a bite force of 400 pounds per square inch, and their retractable claws are designed for gripping and tearing flesh. Grace had been assigned to evening cleanup duty, preparing food and ensuring all enclosures were secure for the night. Ranger's enclosure was her final stop, and as she approached with his evening meal, she noticed he was positioned near the front of the enclosure, closer to the barrier than she'd ever seen him. The mountain lion appeared calm, lying in a relaxed position with his injured leg stretched out. Grace pulled out her phone for photos, initially shooting from the designated safe distance behind the secondary barrier, but the shots weren't quite right. The chain-link fencing created shadows, and the distance made him appear less impressive. She moved closer to the primary enclosure fence, where the lighting was better and the angle more dramatic. What Grace didn't notice was that a section of the primary fencing had been damaged during recent maintenance work. A gap had opened between 2 fence panels, creating an opening just wide enough for a mountain lion's paw to reach through. The gap was partially hidden by vegetation, but Ranger had discovered it days earlier. Grace positioned herself directly in front of the gap, holding her phone at arm's length for a selfie with the mountain lion in the background. She was focused entirely on her phone screen when Ranger suddenly rose to his feet. In one explosive motion, he lunged toward the fence. Ranger's massive paw shot through the gap, his claws extended and razor sharp. The paw caught Grace's outstretched arm just above the wrist, and his claws sank deep into her flesh, piercing muscle and scraping against bone. The force of his strike pulled her forward against the fence, and his grip tightened as he began dragging her toward the opening. Grace's phone flew from her hand as she was yanked against the chain link barrier. Ranger's claws raked down her arm, tearing through skin and muscle as he tried to pull her through the gap. His other paw emerged through the opening, catching her shoulder and driving his claws deep into her chest and neck. The mountain lion's powerful muscles strained as he attempted to drag his prey through the narrow opening. Grace's body was pressed against the fence, her arm and shoulder partially inside the enclosure where Ranger could reach her with his teeth. His jaws clamped down on her forearm, his canine teeth puncturing arteries and crushing bone. Ranger maintained his grip, his predatory instincts fully engaged. His teeth found her neck, delivering a crushing bite that severed her corroded artery and caused massive hemorrhaging. Within minutes, her movement ceased entirely, but the mountain lion continued his attack, driven by millions of years of evolutionary programming. The evening shift supervisor discovered the scene nearly 2 hours later during routine security rounds. Grace's body was partially inside the enclosure, held fast by Ranger's continued grip. It took 3 tranquilizer darts to subdue the mountain lion, enough for staff to safely recover her body. The investigation revealed the gap in the fencing in Grace's phone, which had recorded the final moments before the attack. The facility immediately implemented new safety protocols, including mandatory buddy systems for all animal care tasks, and Ranger was transferred to a more secure sanctuary facility designed for non-releasable predators. It was July 8, 2016, and the Caribbean sun blazed overhead as gentle waves lapped against the white sand beaches of Tulum. The water was crystal clear, revealing patches of seagrass and coral that created a living mosaic beneath the surface. Near the mangrove inlets, where fresh water mixed with salt, the ecosystem teemed with life, including predators that most tourists never imagined could be lurking in such shallow, seemingly safe waters. Evangeline Rowe had brought her family to Mexico's Riviera for a much-needed break from a challenging school year. At 38, she was a passionate middle school science teacher who used her own adventures to inspire her students' love of marine biology. She wasn't seeking social media fame, just creating memories with her 12-year-old daughter Maya and documenting their coastal explorations for friends who followed their family adventures online. The day had been perfect so far. They had explored ancient Mayan ruins, snorkeled over shallow reefs, and spent hours beachcombing. As afternoon approached, they found themselves at a secluded inlet where mangrove roots created natural pools. The water was warm and inviting, barely waist deep, with a sandy bottom that seemed perfect for wading and photography. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous sharks in the world, responsible for more attacks on humans than any other species except great whites. Unlike most sharks, they can tolerate fresh water and often hunt in shallow coastal areas, estuaries, and mangrove systems. They are aggressive, territorial predators that can grow up to 11 feet long and weigh over 500 pounds. Their powerful jaws contain rows of triangular teeth designed to tear flesh, and they often attack without warning. Maya stood on the sandy shore with her mother's phone, preparing to capture what they planned as their favorite vacation photo. Evangeline waded into the shallow water, the warm liquid reaching just above her waist as she moved toward the center of the inlet. She turned toward her daughter with a bright smile, raising her arms in a gesture of pure joy. The movement stirred up sediment from the bottom, creating small clouds that drifted with the gentle current. The shark had been patrolling the inlet's deeper channels, following scent trails from the mangroves. When Evangeline's movement created disturbance in the water column, the shark's predatory instincts were triggered immediately. Maya was adjusting the camera angle when her mother suddenly screamed. The bull shark had struck from below and behind, its powerful jaws clamping down on Evangeline's left thigh with crushing force. The impact drove her underwater as the shark's teeth severed the femoral artery and tore through muscle and bone. Evangeline fought desperately to reach the surface, her hands clawing at the water as blood poured from the massive wound. The shark released its grip momentarily, circling in the clouded water as it prepared for a second attack. She managed to break the surface, gasping and screaming for help as she tried to swim toward shore. Maya dropped the phone and screamed for her mother. The shark struck again, this time targeting Evangeline's lower back and side. Its teeth punctured her kidney and tore through her spine, paralyzing her instantly. She went under again, her struggles growing weaker as blood loss and shock took hold. A local fisherman heard the screams and rushed over in his small boat, using his paddle to strike the water and drive the shark away. He pulled Evangeline from the inlet, but her injuries were catastrophic. The femoral artery had been completely severed, and she had lost massive amounts of blood. Despite desperate efforts to stop the bleeding and rush transport to the nearest medical facility, Evangeline was pronounced dead within an hour. The combination of blood loss, shock, and internal injuries had been too severe to overcome. Mexican authorities investigated the incident and determined it was a tragic accident. New warning signs were posted about shark activity in mangrove areas, and local tour operators began including shark safety information in their briefings. The bull shark was never located, having disappeared into the vast network of channels and reefs. Maya was cared for by resort staff until relatives could arrive. The phone that had been meant to capture a joyful moment was found later, its final video showing the crystal clear water suddenly turning red as screams echoed across the peaceful inlet. It was April 30th, 2015, and the Oklahoma countryside was alive with spring. The private exotic animal compound sat on 40 acres of rolling pasture land outside Oklahoma City, home to dozens of rescued animals from circuses and failed roadside attractions. The facility operated under special permits, housing everything from big cats to primates. Connor Keene was the kind of 16-year-old who lived for attention and laughs. The high school junior from nearby Edmond was known as the class clown, always ready with pranks that would get classmates laughing and teachers frustrated. His social media accounts were filled with increasingly dangerous challenges designed to generate views and comments. Connor was visiting with two friends, guests of the facility's owner's nephew. The adults had gone to prepare evening feeding, leaving the teenagers alone with strict instructions to stay in designated areas and avoid animal contact. But Connor had never been good at following rules, especially when there was opportunity to create impressive content. Chimpanzees are among the most dangerous animals in captivity, despite their portrayal as cute, human-like creatures. Adult chimps are incredibly strong, with muscle density nearly twice that of humans and ability to generate bone-breaking forces. They possess powerful arms with tremendous gripping strength, and teeth include large canines designed for fighting. Most importantly, chimpanzees are highly intelligent and emotional animals that become aggressive when stressed or threatened. The compound's chimpanzee was a 30-year-old male named Caesar who had been retired from a traveling circus after becoming too aggressive for performance work. Years of captivity and forced human interaction had left him with behavioral issues, making him unpredictable and potentially dangerous. The friends had been exploring for an hour when they found Caesar's enclosure. The chimpanzee sat near the front, apparently relaxed and showing mild interest in his visitors. Connor immediately saw opportunity for viral content. He began making faces at the chimp, mimicking expressions while friends recorded with phones. Caesar initially seemed amused, but chimpanzees are highly sensitive to human body language. What Connor interpreted as playful interaction was actually increasing the animal's stress and agitation. The chimp's posture changed, shoulders tensed, lips pulled back, eyes taking on intense focus. Connor escalated his performance, making louder noises and exaggerated gestures while moving closer to the cage bars. The final trigger came when Connor pressed his face close to the bars and made exaggerated kissing sounds while holding his phone for a close-up selfie. Caesar exploded into action with shocking speed. His powerful arm shot through the cage bars and clamped around Connor's wrist with crushing force. The chimp's grip strength immediately fractured bones in Connor's forearm as Caesar began pulling the teenager toward the cage with irresistible force. Connor's phone flew from his hand as he was yanked against metal bars. Caesar's other hand emerged, grabbing Connor's shoulder and hair while powerful arms worked to drag the screaming teenager closer. The chimp's face contorted with rage, lips pulled back revealing large canine teeth. Caesar's jaws found Connor's face and neck as the teenager was pressed against the cage bars. The chimp's canine teeth punctured Connor's jaw and cheek, fracturing bone and tearing through muscle tissue. Blood flowed immediately as Caesar's bite crushed Connor's mandible and severed facial nerves and blood vessels. The chimpanzee's attack was methodical and devastating. After securing his grip on Connor's head and neck, Caesar began using powerful hands to tear at the teenager's arms and shoulders. His fingers found soft tissue and began ripping away chunks of flesh and muscle. Caesar's teeth found Connor's neck, delivering a crushing bite that severed his carotid artery and caused massive hemorrhaging. Connor's friends ran screaming toward the main buildings to find help. The facility owner and staff arrived within minutes, armed with fire extinguishers and deterrent devices. But by the time they reached the enclosure, Connor was already beyond help. It took several minutes and multiple deterrent methods to convince Caesar to release his grip. The incident prompted immediate investigation by state wildlife authorities and resulted in the facility losing permits to house dangerous animals. Caesar was relocated to a specialized primate sanctuary with enhanced security measures. The facility owner faced criminal charges for allowing unsupervised access to dangerous animals. Connor's death sent shockwaves through his high school community and sparked discussions about the dangers of social media-driven risk-taking among teenagers. His family struggled with grief and guilt, wondering if they could have done more to curb his dangerous attention-seeking behavior. Connor learned too late that primates can be deadly when provoked. It was May 18, 2017, and the Florida Everglades shimmered under an oppressive afternoon sun. The air was thick with humidity and the buzz of insects, while Spanish moss draped from cypress trees like tattered curtains. In the shallow waters of Lokahatchee Wildlife Refuge, the boundary between land and water blurred into a maze of sawgrass and hidden channels where danger lurked just beneath the surface. Brielle Sutton had convinced 3 classmates to join her for a post-exam celebration in the wetlands. At 16, she was known at school as the quiet nature lover who ran a modest Instagram account focused on Florida's endangered ecosystems. Her post rarely got more than a few dozen likes, but she was passionate about wildlife photography and often ventured off-mark trails to capture unique compositions. Recent viral success with a photo of a rare bird had emboldened her to take more creative risks. The group had spent the morning on the designated boardwalk, taking typical tourist photos and complaining about the heat. But Brielle was restless, scanning the landscape for something more interesting than the standard wildlife viewing spots. She had searched the area extensively and knew the most photogenic locations were often away from the crowds. When they reached a bend in the trail where a shallow pool extended into a grove of moss-draped trees, Brielle spotted what looked like the perfect backdrop. The water was only knee-deep, with what appeared to be an old log extending from the bank, ideal for a unique perspective shot with the Spanish moss creating a natural frame. American alligators are perfectly adapted ambush predators, capable of remaining motionless for hours while waiting for prey. They can hold their breath for up to 24 hours and often float just below the surface with only their eyes and nostrils exposed. An adult alligator's bite force exceeds 2,900 pounds per square inch, stronger than any other animal in North America. They typically avoid humans, but will attack if surprised or if they perceive a threat to their territory. Brielle waded into the shallow water, her phone held high as she composed the shot. Her friends called out warnings about snakes and alligators, but she waved them off with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours in similar environments without incident. The water was warm and murky, stirred up by her movement as she approached what she assumed was a partially submerged log. The log was actually a 12-foot alligator that had been resting motionless in the shallow water, its body covered by a thin layer of algae and debris. The reptile had been there for hours, perfectly camouflaged and waiting for fish or birds to come within striking range. Brielle's approach and the vibrations from her movement triggered its predatory instincts. She positioned herself carefully, one foot on what she believed was solid wood, preparing to squat down for the perfect angle. The surface felt rough and stable beneath her sneaker as she shifted her weight and raised her phone to capture the shot. The alligator exploded from the water with terrifying speed, its massive jaw snapping shut around Brielle's leg just above the knee. The force of the bite shattered her femur instantly as the reptile's teeth, designed to grip and hold prey, punctured deep into muscle and bone. Brielle's scream was cut short as the alligator's death roll began. The reptile spun violently, using its powerful tail and body weight to disorient its prey. Brielle was pulled under the murky water, her phone flying from her hand as she was dragged toward deeper water. The alligator's grip never loosened as it continued the death roll, a hunting technique designed to drown prey and tear away chunks of flesh. Her friends screamed from the bank, but there was nothing they could do. The water churned red as the alligator's teeth found arteries, and Brielle's struggles grew weaker with each passing second. Within 2 minutes, the thrashing stopped, and the water began to settle. Park rangers arrived within 20 minutes, alerted by the frantic 911 call from Brielle's friends. They used long poles and noisemakers to drive the alligator away from the area, but it was too late. Brielle's body was recovered 18 hours later by specialized teams who tracked the alligator to its den through drag marks in the mud. The investigation revealed that Brielle had ignored multiple warning signs posted throughout the refuge about alligator dangers. The attack was ruled accidental, with no fault assigned to park management. The alligator was captured and relocated to a more remote area of the Everglades, following standard protocols for animals involved in fatal encounters. Brielle's Instagram account became a memorial, with friends and family sharing memories of her passion for nature and photography. Her final post, uploaded automatically from her phone's scheduled content, was a photo of sunrise over the wetlands with a caption about the beauty of Florida's wild spaces. The refuge added additional warning signs and increased ranger patrols in areas where visitors might be tempted to leave designated paths. Brielle's death served as a stark reminder that even familiar environments can harbor deadly surprises. On May 23, 2018, the dense pine forest of rural Ontario stood thick and quiet around the remote property known as Northwood's Exotic Animal Haven. The facility wasn't marked by signage or advertised online. It had no entry gate, no visitor hours. From the outside, it looked like a large estate, but beyond the trees stood cages and the low sounds of pacing animals. Robert and Linda Mackenzie had lived there for nearly 22 years. In that time, they had acquired over a dozen exotic animals: lions, leopards, cougars, and more recently, Bengal tigers. Their interest in wildlife began modestly: rescued servals, a retired zoo leopard. But as their wealth grew, so did their ambitions. Robert and Linda, fueled by money and a shared fascination with big cats, gradually turned their remote property into a personal zoo. Together, they poured time and money into building their collection, creating what they believed was a personal sanctuary. But Northwoods was never officially licensed as a zoo. It operated on the thin edge of private ownership laws. legal enough to avoid scrutiny but far from regulated. The animals were housed in makeshift enclosures, some welded from construction fencing, others modified from livestock pens. Most were built by local contractors without any formal experience in predator containment. Still, to the Mackenzies and their small circle of friends, the place was something to be proud of, something impressive. That Wednesday afternoon, Robert and Linda were entertaining longtime friends David and Catherine Harrington. The two couples had met more than a decade earlier at a private fundraiser in Toronto. David had built his fortune in real estate, and Catherine had a finance background. With their children grown, they often sought out secluded and unusual travel experiences. The Harringtons had visited before, but this time was different. The Mackenzies had a new tiger, Raja, recently acquired from a failed roadside zoo. The afternoon began unremarkably. The couple sat on the Mackenzies' elevated deck, shaded by tall spruce and overlooking the lower half of the property. A breeze carried the faint scent of pine and animal musk. Over wine and late lunch, the couples caught up, surrounded by animals few others ever saw. As the sun began to lower and the second bottle of wine emptied, Robert suggested they walk down to see Raja. He described the tiger in affectionate terms, exaggerating his gentleness, recounting how he'd been calm as a house cat since arriving. There was no urgency in the decision, no group consensus, just a casual agreement to go see the newest addition. The enclosure stood downhill, framed in a 12-foot chain-link fence reinforced with steel. The tiger lay on the concrete, its striped coat vivid in the afternoon light. Robert stood near the outer gate, boasting about Raja's size and behavior. As he spoke, the others stood behind him. David stepped forward for a closer look while Catherine stayed back, phone in hand, casually framing the scene in her camera's viewfinder. Then Robert made a decision. He opened the outer gate and gestured toward the small buffer zone between the two fences. The area was only a few feet wide, a space designed more for feeding than for foot traffic. It wasn't meant for visitors, but there was no warning, no second thought. Robert invited David to step inside for a better photo. It was the kind of casual rule-breaking that felt harmless in the moment, especially between old friends. David stepped in. Inside the enclosure, Raja shifted his weight. He stood, muscles rippling beneath his coat, and moved toward the fence. And for a few moments, everything seemed still. Raja's movement was slow but purposeful. He stepped forward, eyes fixed on the figure now standing in the narrow buffer zone. The space was small, no more than 4 feet wide, and bordered on one side by the main enclosure and on the other by the outer fence. David remained just outside the inner gate, clearly uncertain, but still facing the tiger. He was smiling faintly, holding his position, waiting for whatever Robert had intended to show him. Behind them, Catherine raised her phone to take another photo. Raja's body language shifted, ears flattening slightly, tail flicking low and slow, his head tilting downward. Subtle but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. These were not signs of friendliness, they were cues of focus, tension, and a predator's rising engagement. A moment later, the tiger lunged. He didn't roar, there was no dramatic leap. He simply accelerated forward in a short, explosive burst. His paw hit the fence with such force that a weakly fastened seam split open, giving Raja access he should never have had. His paw came through first, claws extended, catching David by the forearm and pulling him violently forward. The impact slammed his shoulder into the fence, pinning him. In a flash, Raja reached farther through the gap, grabbing at whatever flesh he could reach. David tried to pull back, but the tiger's strength overwhelmed him instantly. Catherine screamed. The phone slipped from her hand and hit the ground, the screen still lit. The fence clattered and trembled with every movement as Raja dragged David's upper body against the metal. His jaws clamped down at the gap, finding David's shoulder, then his neck. Blood sprayed across the gravel. David's legs kicked, boots skidding for grip, but he was held in place, partially inside the enclosure, trapped by the tiger's grip. Robert sprinted to the shed and returned with a fire extinguisher and hose, makeshift tools for a disaster already underway. He returned less than a minute later. Catherine was still frozen near the outer gate, hands shaking, voice cracking as she called for help that wouldn't come fast enough. Robert triggered the extinguisher first, spraying a cloud of white powder into the air near Raja's face. The tiger paused, disoriented, but didn't release its hold. Robert followed with the hose, directing a jet of cold water at the animal's eyes. It slowed Raja briefly, but it didn't stop him. Linda called emergency services, struggling to decide their location, unlisted, unmarked, and unfamiliar to dispatchers. The attack lasted just over 4 minutes. During that time, David suffered repeated bites and deep claw lacerations to his chest, shoulder, and neck. One of the bites severed his brachial artery, a critical blood vessel beneath the arm. The loss of blood was immediate and massive. By the time Raja finally released him, David collapsed against the fence motionless, his shirt soaked through with blood. Robert dropped the hose and rushed to him, but there was no pulse. 27 minutes after Linda's call, a volunteer fire unit arrived, followed closely by paramedics. The responders found Catherine seated near the outer gate, still in shock. Robert stood with blood-covered hands, silent. David lay on the ground where he had fallen, surrounded by a trail of disturbed dirt, crushed grass, and streaks of red. Attempts at resuscitation failed. David Harrington was pronounced dead during airlift preparation at Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto. The official cause of death was exsanguination due to a severed artery in the shoulder and multiple puncture wounds. The investigation exposed a chain of preventable failures. The fencing had been compromised, the buffer zone was inadequate, there were no tranquilizers on site, no written emergency procedures, and no formal training. Robert Mackenzie had built his facility on confidence and improvisation, not on safety or oversight. Criminal charges were considered but ultimately dropped. Catherine Harrington pursued a civil suit instead, citing negligence and misrepresentation of risk. The Mackenzies settled out of court, and the remaining animals were quietly removed from the property. Northwoods was shut down for good, and land sold in silence the following year. David Harrington's death led to new laws tightening exotic animal ownership, but no plaques marked the place, only the memory of a quiet afternoon and a fatal mistake. In the vast wilderness of Alaska, Katmai National Park stands as one of nature's most impressive sanctuaries. Spanning over 4 million acres, this pristine landscape is where volcanic forces meet glacial valleys, creating an ecosystem unlike anywhere else in North America. The park's crown jewel, Brooks Falls, draws thousands of visitors each year who come to witness one of nature's most spectacular displays: bears fishing for salmon in the rushing waters. Ethan Carter was a 26-year-old office worker from Portland, Oregon. After 3 years working as an account manager at a local insurance firm, he had finally saved enough for his dream Alaska trip. Living in a modest apartment and driving the same used Honda Civic he'd had since college, Ethan spent his weekends taking casual hikes in Oregon's state parks, though he had no serious outdoor experience. The trip to Alaska had been a year in planning, not because of any particular expertise, but because Ethan wanted to make the most of his limited vacation time. He convinced 3 friends from his apartment complex, Mike Thompson, Chris Rodriguez, and James Chen, to join him. Like Ethan, they were regular guys with regular jobs. Mike worked in IT, Chris was a high school teacher, and James managed a local restaurant. The group arrived in Alaska on September 3, 2018. They spent their first few days exploring Denali National Park, staying in basic lodges and taking guided bus tours. None of them had any experience with true wilderness or dangerous wildlife. Their knowledge of bears came primarily from nature documentaries and basic safety pamphlets provided by the parks. On September 8th, they arrived at Katmai National Park. The weather was unusually clear for September, with temperatures hovering around 65 degrees Fahrenheit and visibility extending for miles. The pristine conditions meant that Brooks Falls would be especially active with both bears and tourists. The morning began like any other at Brooks Falls. Park rangers conducted their daily briefings, warning visitors about maintaining safe distances from wildlife. The viewing platforms were already filling up with tourists by 10 a.m., their cameras aimed at the falls where several bears fished in the rushing waters. By early afternoon, the main viewing platform had become crowded with wildlife photographers. Their expensive equipment, telephoto lenses longer than a man's arm, and camera bodies worth thousands of dollars, captured stunning close-ups of the bears while maintaining a safe distance. Among the bears they photographed was bear number 856, a dominant male who had ruled these waters for nearly a decade. Ethan and his friends arrived at the platform around 2:30 p.m., squeezing through the crowd of serious photographers. The group watched with amusement as the photographers discussed technical details and compared their elaborate equipment. Ethan pulled out his iPhone, holding it up mockingly next to a photographer's massive telephoto lens. Mike and James joined in the joking, laughing about how these photographers needed such expensive gear to take pictures of bears that were right there in front of them. Only Chris seemed uncomfortable with their attitude, having actually read through the park's safety materials during their trip planning. He understood that the expensive equipment wasn't just about getting better pictures. It was about maintaining a safe distance from deadly predators. The casual attitude that had developed during their trip had stripped away any real sense of danger. After days of viewing wildlife from bushes and platforms, the bears had become just another tourist attraction in their minds, like animals in a zoo rather than powerful predators in their natural habitat. As they watched bear number 856 fishing in the falls, the group's playful mockery of the photographers escalated. Mike suggested they could get better photos with their phones than these professionals with their expensive gear. James added that all those fancy cameras were probably just for show. Their jokes and casual attitude fed into Ethan's growing confidence. Brown bears like number 856 are perfectly evolved killing machines. Their massive bodies, weighing up to 1,500 pounds, contain layers of muscles that can generate explosive force. A single swipe from their forearm can decapitate a moose, while their jaws can crush bones with over 1,200 pounds of pressure per square inch. Despite their enormous size, these bears can sprint at speeds reaching 35 miles per hour, faster than any Olympic sprinter. Bear number 856 was particularly impressive, even by Katmai standards. At 1,200 pounds, he had established complete dominance over the prime fishing spots at Brook Falls. Rangers had documented his unusual aggression toward both other bears and any perceived intrusions into his territory. His massive frame carried scars from countless battles, testament to years of violent encounters that had earned him his position at the top of the hierarchy. Spotting what appeared to be a clear path down to the water's edge, Ethan made his fatal decision. He pointed out how he could get a better angle than anyone else on the platform. Chris immediately protested, reminding them about the morning's safety briefing and the multiple warning signs. But his concerns were dismissed with more laughter and jokes. The casual nature of Ethan's decision made it all the more tragic. There was no grand purpose, no professional photography goal, just a young man's impulsive desire to prove he could get closer than others, spurred on by friendly banter and a complete misunderstanding of the danger. As Ethan climbed over the safety railing, Chris made one final attempt to stop him. His voice was tense with genuine concern, but Mike and James were still treating it as a joke, even encouraging Ethan to get closer for a better shot. The other photographers on the platform began noticing the commotion, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others frantically trying to signal the nearby rangers. Ethan walked confidently toward the water's edge, holding his iPhone up as he moved. The 50-yard safety distance established by decades of research and countless bear encounters rapidly diminished. 40 yards, then 30, then just 25 yards from where bear number 856 was fishing. The massive predator noticed the intrusion immediately. The attack unfolded with terrifying speed. Bear number 856 exploded from his fishing spot, covering the distance to Ethan in mere seconds. The bear's charge was silent. No roar, no warning growl, just 1,200 pounds of muscle and fury moving with lethal purpose. Ethan only managed to turn halfway before the first impact. The initial strike came from the bear's left paw, its 4-inch claws tearing through Ethan's jacket and into his back. The force knocked him face first into the ground, driving the air from his lungs. Before he could even process what was happening, the bear's massive jaws clamped down on his right thigh. The bite force of a brown bear exceeds that of a lion or tiger, and bear number 856 demonstrated this power with devastating effect. His teeth crushed through muscle, sinew, and bone like they were paper. The bear's bite severed Ethan's femoral artery instantly, starting a deadly countdown that would end in minutes without immediate medical intervention. As Ethan lay pinned beneath the enormous predator, bear number 856 began what wildlife experts call a killing shake, a violent side-to-side motion designed to tear flesh and break bones. The movement was so powerful it lifted Ethan's entire body off the ground. His screams echoed across the falls, sending tourists scrambling back from the railings in terror. Mike and James stood frozen in shock, while Chris collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by the horror unfolding before them. Park rangers stationed at the viewing platform reacted immediately. 2 rangers armed with 12-gauge shotguns loaded with slug rounds rushed toward the scene, while another radioed for emergency medical support. But even these experienced professionals were shocked by the brutality of the attack. The bear released its grip on Ethan's leg only to clamp down on his shoulder, its teeth easily puncturing through his collarbone and into his chest cavity. Each bite delivered over 1,200 pounds of pressure per square inch, crushing bones and rupturing internal organs. Blood soaked the ground beneath Ethan's body as bear number 856 continued its assault. Rangers fired warning shots into the air trying to frighten the bear away without risking hitting Ethan. The massive predator paused momentarily, lifting its blood-covered muzzle to assess this new threat. This brief interruption allowed the Rangers to see the full extent of Ethan's injuries. His body lay twisted and broken, with massive wounds visible across his torso and limbs. After what seemed like an eternity but was actually less than 2 minutes, bear number 856 finally retreated, leaving Ethan motionless on the blood-soaked ground. The Rangers rushed forward, their medical training telling them that every second counted. But the damage was catastrophic. Ethan had lost too much blood, and his internal injuries were too severe. Despite immediate medical attention and a desperate attempt to stabilize him for helicopter evacuation, Ethan Carter was pronounced dead at 5:47 p.m. The official autopsy would later reveal the true extent of the bear's power: 37 distinct bite wounds, multiple crushed bones, and severe internal trauma. The right femoral artery had been completely severed, leading to massive blood loss that proved impossible to stop, even with immediate medical intervention. Park officials immediately closed Brook Falls to visitors, evacuating hundreds of tourists from the viewing platforms and surrounding trails. The closure lasted 3 days while investigators documented the scene and assessed safety protocols. This marked only the second fatal bear attack in Katmai's history, the first occurring in 1965 when a park employee surprised a mother bear with cubs. Unlike many bear attack cases where the animal is euthanized, wildlife biologists argued strongly against this course of action. They pointed out that bear number 856 had been defending its established fishing territory and had shown no previous aggression toward humans who maintained proper distance. The decision to spare the bear was controversial, but ultimately supported by both scientific evidence and park policy. The incident made national headlines, with media outlets struggling to understand why an ordinary office worker with no history of reckless behavior would willingly put himself in such grave danger. Park rangers reviewing the case identified a phenomenon they had seen before: the normalization of danger. Days spent watching bears from a safe distance had gradually eroded Ethan's natural fear of these apex predators. The casual atmosphere among his friends and their jokes about professional photographers created a false sense of security, leading to a deadly mistake. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.